the reality that we live as Israelis is so not normal. The fact that without warning, it could be
Mm.
everywhere in bus stations, in celebration halls, on the streets, in restaurants, and gas station.
I want to introduce everybody to a special guest today who goes by the name of Reut. I actually learned that pronunciation 3 seconds ago. So thank you very much for that. And the reason why I felt it was necessary to have this conversation is because, well, you would actually message me after seeing one of my videos. I think it was titled "In Defense of Bibi Netanyahu" or something of that nature, right? And you had given me a perspective and insight that me being on, the other side of the world or whatever it may be, couldn't have necessarily understood or known unless I was interacting and engaging with somebody who is actually, as we say, on soil or on the ground there, more specifically in Israel. And so, I wanted to get a little deeper into the insights that you sort of exposed me to. But before we get into that, I want to know your own personal story. And so, I want to start kind of backwards, if you don't mind, where I want to start with the sequence of events. So I want to know where you were and what your personal experience was before, and I mean right before October 7th, and then what was life like right after?
Okay. Um, Life before were pretty regular, usual,
Mm,
but the reality of living in Israel is always in the shadow of the conflict. From time to
mm-hmm,
time there are the suicide bombers and um, the operations or wars. Um, so you mean like the days right before October 7 or in general?
I guess, I guess really what I'm getting to is like, what was the difference in your own life? What changed? Whether it was, emotionally, your thoughts about the world or whatever it is, what did that transformation look like for you, if there was one at all?
Yes, of course there is. I think that before October 7th, I was aware of the conflict, but I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
as invested in learning and understanding as I am now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when October 7th happened, I think that it took over a month to function regularly.
Mm.
It was such a deep trauma to
Mm.
understand. Every day there was a little bit of more pieces and information of the atrocities that happened. And for the normal mind, it was way too much to comprehend that, such
Mm.
things can happen. I think that in a way it just shook me to the core of my soul, that it was very hard to understand and to try to function regularly.
Mm.
Um, I think that besides I should say that I'm the least affected by the war. By that I mean there are people who I don't know how to say it. I want to mention that my English is not the best, but I will try. Reserved,
That's no problem at all. Absolutely.
reserved, I think they say it in English. Some people
Mm.
go back to the army, they serve for 200, 300, 400 days, and it's affecting
Mm-hmm.
their families and their businesses and their lives. And some of the people lost their homes. and still trying to find a solution. So many, and of course, people have lost their loved ones. So there are many people who were affected more than me in that regard. But I think that life has changed in different ways. One of the ways were that my husband started to carry a gun, which is unusual. It's
Mm.
not like in the United States. Here in Israel, it's not something, if you're not a soldier or a policeman, it's not something that is acceptable or you can do. But
Wow.
because, yes, because they understood that from time to time we are suffering from terror attacks, the individual ones that sometimes can stab people on the street or shoot or uh, so in order to keep some security besides the policemen and the soldiers, regular people with military background started to carry guns.
Mm.
Um, Besides that, we experienced the sirens, the rockets, which was very stressful.
Mm.
Um, Last year, it's affected the way we travel, the way we manage our lives, going to school or not. Last year, there was a missile that hit across the road on our neighbor backyard. It was, I think, 120, 150 meters from our house, which was terrifying.
What
Yes, I was alone with
was
my
this? Was this the
son.
first time? Was this the first time you had experienced? I want to get deeper into this. Was this the first time you had experienced something like that? Or could you even fathom that it being that close to your own home?
Well, yes, I think that because how could I say it? I guess that again, living in Israel, you kind of used to sirens from time to time, or these
Mm.
attacks. But when it hit across the road, it was terrifying because
Mm.
the sound when it hits the ground is so loud that I thought that the minute I opened the door of the bomb shelter, I was alone with my 7-year-old son. I was sure that I'm going to see the house ruined. It was so loud. All the blinds in the house, all around the house, were open from I don't know how you say it, I forgot the word, from from the heat, all the blinds opened.
Mm.
So it was an extremely scary experience. I think that also when you hear the sirens and when you every home, or not every home, most of the Israeli homes in the last 30 years I are required for a bomb shelter in
Mm.
the house. So
Wow.
um, when you hear the sirens and when you run and then you can hear sometimes the noises of the Iron Dome, uh,
Mm.
hitting the rockets and the sound of the booms in the sky, That's when you know it's close to you, and that's when it's the scariest. The
Mm.
feeling is like you're a sitting duck, and you just need to pray for God that it won't hit your house. It's a feeling of
You know,
yes.
I was just thinking to myself how, you know, for much of us in places like the United States, you know, you hear of crime and you hear of some of these atrocities, but I feel we're so far removed from war and how ugly war really is. And I think you've done one of the best jobs at drawing this real picture of what it looks like to live in the midst of that, to live your everyday life, right? And again, I'm still processing this, to be honest, and I likely will even, you know, post interview, etc. But it's just it's unfathomable for me, as safeguarded as I have been throughout most of my life. You know, unless you are a soldier in the United States military, you likely have never seen war. And so, you know, you said that you were with your 7-year-old son
Mhm.
and you're with him as he's going through this. What is his emotional state? You know, like what's going on in his little mind, in his little heart, if, you know, I guess if he was even able to articulate those things to you.
He was scared, but I
Mm-hmm.
tried to uh, soothe him in a way. I just we were face to face, and I told him that everything is okay, that we are alive,
Mm.
we are okay. I thought that maybe the house was hit, but I tried to focus on the fact that even if the house was hit, because after the sirens and the boom sound, we're supposed to stay another 10 minutes in the shelter for safety.
Mm.
If there's other parts of the missiles fall into the ground. So those 10 minutes were nerve-wracking. But I
Mm.
just looked at him and tried to say, and I told him that we're alive, we're okay,
Yeah.
everything is okay. That's the most important. I'm here, you're here. So he wasn't really expressing himself. It was more me trying to soothe him.
Mm-hmm. And this was it, time frame wise, how long ago was that?
A year ago, I
A
think
year
exactly a
ago.
year. Yes, yes. September, I think last year.
And ever since then, you said, you know, I mean, obviously before sharing this exact story, how you're already in this place where it's kind of everybody is on edge. You don't know necessarily what to expect, like the next moment. Have you
Yes.
been experiencing that level of sort of PTSD?
I think that no, no. Um,
Mm.
when I was growing up and when I was a teenager, I lived near a city called Federa, which have suffered, I
Mm-hmm.
think, in a few years, seven terror attacks. By that I mean suicide bombers in bus stations, stabbing, um, events like these kind of. It's weird to say it, but in a way, you get used to living this way. It's not normal.
Wow.
I until the
Yeah.
war, I wasn't even thinking about it as deeply as I do now, that the reality that we live as Israelis is so not normal. The fact that without warning, it could be
Mm.
everywhere in bus stations, in celebration halls, on the streets, on restaurants and gas station. I'm just thinking about events over the years. It could be everywhere, anywhere, and at any time. And I think that in a way you kind of get used to it, if I can
Wow.
describe it this way. I think that the Israelis also have the mentality that even though it's frightening, we're not going to let it affect the way we live. We're not going to live in fear. So there's a usually when there's a terror attack, I think that you can see very quickly that people are getting back to their usual um,
Hmm.
routines or behaviors, going out. And I think that a part of it is because of the mentality that they're not going to intimidate us from living our
Mm.
lives.
Yeah.
So there's a very quick rebound from these horrible events. And so in a way, when you living in Israel, it's kind of always in the shadow of the conflict, but
Hmm.
with the war, it was it did was a step up in a way, you know, with the Iran attack, and it was more intense. It was scary.
And why was that? What was the difference? I mean, again, for the average American to think about a suicide bomber attack, that would be national news for the next year. Every protocol, laws would be changed, but yet, in a place like Israel, these things have happened multiple times over the years. How is war different, and why is this one different specifically? And that's going to kind of tie into where our conversation began.
I think that first of all, the hostages was
Mm,
it has a huge effect on the Israeli society. You won't get very far in Israel without seeing some sort of reminder of the hostages, whether it would be
mm,
signs or um, yellow chairs in museums, in restaurants, in businesses. People wear yellow ribbon pins. Uh, we tie yellow ribbons on our car. So
mm,
it's everywhere in your consciousness. And of course, it's very painful. Um,
mm,
it's a painful reminder, and I think that that's different.
mm,
It's such a small country that we're the hostages' families. We got
mhm,
to know them. We even though we don't know the hostages personally, you got to know their names from
mhm,
their, their personality in a way, from their families' stories. And the hostages was the fact that they are hostages. It's, I think that I can say that we cannot live, return to live our life regularly without them.
mhm,
It's even though we don't know, I don't know them personally. It's like a cloud. Like mentally, it's like
mm,
a cloud that always hovers over you. It's so painful, and we want them back. Um, so that's one of the difference. And I don't know really how to explain the sirens and the fear that it could catch you everywhere. Um,
Mm.
you see, this is where my English is. I'm not sure how to express it.
Well, then I want to draw something else out of you, which is, have you done much traveling since around October 7th, globally,
Um,
etc., outside of this?
much no, but we
Okay.
did. And
Okay.
I didn't see the protest, or I
Mm.
didn't experience any animosity. But
Mm.
after the starvation propaganda in Gaza, it seems like it
Mm-hmm.
stepped a notch. And this summer we decided not to go anywhere, just to
Mm.
avoid any
Wow.
unpleasant incidents. I think that
Mm.
me and my husband can handle it, but traveling with my boy, I don't want him to experience it. I don't want the conversation of explaining him why something like that can happen.
Yeah.
So we just avoided it.
Wow. And I mean, you literally asked the next question that I was going to have as far as, what has the treatment of others been towards you. But this is a question, I often ask, and I do my best to find different answers from different places. But why do you believe that so many people, especially in the West, have become so cruel to the Jewish people?
I think that it goes back many years of Jew hatred.
Mm.
I want to tell you that a few days after October 7th, I don't remember
Mm.
the context, but I saw some post on Instagram and I saw the word anti-Semitism, and
Mm.
I just rolled my eyes. That was my
Yeah.
initial reaction because I didn't experience it. I was aware that, of course, there is such a thing, but it didn't manifest in any way in our lives. So my
Mm.
initial reaction was like rolling my eyes, like, what anti-Semitism? You're saying it too quickly. But
Mm.
unfortunately, I understand now that I was wrong, and Jew hatred is very alive and in a big magnitude that it's
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming. I think that to see the unfair treatment toward the Jewish people was it shook me in a way.
Mm.
Um, when the women in the Nova Festival were, let's say, violated, no
Yeah.
feminist group, no women rights or no human rights, nobody said anything. And it was painful to understand that if you're Jewish or an Israeli woman, you just don't count. It doesn't matter. They will speak on anyone else, but if you're Jewish, everyone is silent. The Red Cross, for example, didn't visit our hostages, didn't do anything. So as I saw the unfair treatment towards Jewish and Israelis, I understood that we have a very big problem.
Mm.
Um, the whole way that people approach the subject of whether Israel should have the right to exist or not, or if our response is in proportion. It was very obvious that we are being held in um,
It's
the
like a
word,
different
I'm sorry.
standard.
Yes, that's the word. Thank you.
Yeah.
Different
Yeah. I
standards.
mean, and that's always what confounded me because, I like to look at things from the human standpoint. And to me, how I saw this was, you have, let's say, a literal neighborhood, and there is one small home that continues to be attacked by those who are their neighbors, right? And on one unfaithful evening, you have a break-in where the wife is taken, she is violated, she is slaughtered, the children are taken as hostages. And so it's like, what is the husband, the father, supposed to do in that situation? Is it not justified that he at the very least go after his children until his children are home, at the very least? And at the most, is there's going to be some level of retaliation to what happened. And asking that sort of question, I think, to anybody who has a sense of humanity, they would say, well, of course you would do everything you could for your family. But yet, for some reason, when it comes to the Jewish people, because this is the story, as much as people like to, mince words and then create all these other narratives, that is the story. There was no instigation. It wasn't a war that was already ensued. These were people who made a decision, well, actually had gone off of their own ideology to say, we're going to destroy these people because we hate them. Simple as that.
Yes,
And so again, that's been the most difficult part to come to terms with, living in this part of the world and seeing the rest of the Western world sort of unraveling in this way.
yes.
And so, do you think that much of it is to do with the propaganda, or is it there was an already underlying Jew hatred that was there, and now they have an excuse for it?
I think that the Jew hatred was always there. And
Mm,
also with the propaganda, with the money that Iran invested in that and Qatar, it all comes
mm-hmm.
together. I think that people, in a way, don't really care about the truth because it's very easy to check facts and history. It's very approachable, but I think that
Correct.
people are like comfortable believing in those lies
Mm,
and they go with it willingly. They don't bother to
mm.
really check because it doesn't really matter to them. And
Wow.
so it's also the propaganda. I think that people don't understand that their opinion was bought, uh, paid
Mm,
for. I can see it, you talk about it, Hollywood and
yeah.
the paying protesters and what's going on in the USA campuses. It's
Mm-hmm.
founded by them. Maybe it's also the fact that many people feel isolated, lost, and
Mm,
maybe it gives them like sense of I don't know, meaning or like being a part of something, especially if they think that
yeah.
there's some sort of a righteousness in what they're doing. So I think that some of it is ignorant, pure
Yeah.
ignorant. Some of them it's like riding on a hatred that was before.
Mm. So I want to start getting into the conversation which really led us here, which is that of, I guess you can say, leadership. in Israel, right? And you have your own unique perspective on this, and I feel like it is an important perspective because when it comes to Netanyahu, more times than not, it's almost like he's a non-factor, ironically enough, right? Where you know it's as if he I don't know if people are afraid to sort of get into the subject of Bibi outside of conspiracy theorists and people who have already that ingrained Jew hatred and everything is a Jew's fault. Outside of them, when it comes to I guess the Jewish community or Israelis, which isn't just constitutive of Jews but all sorts of peoples. Uh, I guess I guess the place I could start is here. Is Bibi Netanyahu the true leader of the people of Israel?
I would say it's very, he doesn't have a broad support from the
Mm.
people. Some people, of course, support him, but
Mm-hmm.
he has a lot of opposers, opponents. Um, 10 months or 7 months before October 7th, there were every Saturday there were demonstrations, protests against the Israeli government. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the think that in a way it reflects the fact that the Israeli people are divided in their support or non-support to Bibi Netanyahu. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all of us, of course, agree that we need to return the hostages and Hamas is the enemy, but there isn't, I think it would be fair to say that there isn't a agreement across the nation about the way we handle the war. And
Hmm.
for some of the people, it's very frustrating to see how things develop.
So, you know, right now I'm reading the autobiography of Winston Churchill. And, post World War II, well, if you were to ask people who aren't in this neo Nazi sort of mentality, he is one of the heroes of the story. But when you look at kind of the totality of his life, some would have said he was a warmonger, that he did too much, that he was too aggressive or whatever, up until the moment obviously it counted most, right? When now they had to go against the great evil that was Hitler and his Nazi regime. And so, something that I've thought about just personally outside of, information that I may have is what is one to do in such a situation as a leader? You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's I think if we had the least popular president in America and we were thrown into such a traumatic experience where there needed to be a level of retribution, at the very least, as you said, everybody can agree on this: the hostages need to come home. Simple. There's no negotiation. There's no okay, one for one, two. No, no, no. All of them need to come home. Simple. But as far as strategy, the tactics of war, I often say like war is always ugly. One casualty is too many casualties, but it's still war. And again, this is from my perspective, but I want to get your perspective on this as well. Is when you look at some of the numbers, and a lot of it is mixed in with propaganda coming directly from the enemy's camp, but I feel like this war is only has the level of exposure it does because it has to do with the Jewish people at one, right? And there's
yes.
that inherent Jew hatred that is, I mean, prehistoric. But then also because we live in a day and age where you get updates every 5 seconds on the internet of things going on. right? Like if we were in the middle of World War II or Civil War, something like that, that would have seemed in the same way as the worst, atrocity and the worst war ever. So I guess my question in all that is, do you think the the questioning that people have or the frustration they have with Bibi, is it about the outcomes? Is it about, casualties and things of that nature? What is the argument on that side?
Some people feel that he has personal motives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm just reflecting the Israeli state of
Please.
mind. Some of them feel that he wants to stay in power, so
Mm-hmm.
he needs the far extreme right to please them. This is why we can hear from time to time the statement of conquering Gaza, or some of the
Greater
extreme,
Israel and
yes, or like throwing an atom bomb at Gaza, statements that are very extreme and not reflecting of the Israeli majority of people.
mm-hmm.
Because I think that if you ask most of the Israeli people, we don't want to do anything with Gaza. We don't want it.
Yeah. Uh,
Um, So some people feel that in order to stay in power, he needs to please the far and extreme right, and sometimes it's maybe not doing all that he can do in order to return the hostages.
mm-hmm.
And some of the military moves are, not a broad. Understanding or agreement of the way he handles the war. Um, Sometimes people will say that it seems like there isn't much of a plan in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
The way that the Israeli army conducts itself, it seems like there's no, like a order plan. But of course, some of the people do support Bibi Netanyahu and see him as a great leader that does his best to protect Israel.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's also something that's important to know at like a grander level is, because the Jewish people, even Israelis, have been characterized almost as just this like one sort of dimensional people. There's a lack of understanding that you have like far left woke, no, I guess it wouldn't be Israelis because they would denounce anything to do with Zionism, right? So you have these super ultra woke progressives like you have here in the United States. And then on the other side, you're talking about, the far right. And I believe everywhere has a far right, but I haven't, done much due diligence to understand what their beliefs are in the Israeli far right. So, I think that is important to just, especially for the audience out there to know. It's like, look, there are divided camps, even in the
Yes.
midst of those who do consider themselves as Zionists. There is still, people have their own stance and their own opinion on what's going on. And I think one thing that has been weaponized has been that caricature. That's the word I was looking for, of like, this is the Jew, right? This is what they do, this is what they believe, etc., as opposed to the individuality, which is also part and course why, I brought yourself onto the platform, is because the people's stories matter, more than just the experts and, the news people, etc. It's like there's real people going through real experiences, human experiences. And I think it helps to humanize, even for those who do their best not to, and want to, you know kind of continue to perpetuate their woke ideologies, or their far right extremist ideologies here in the West, or more specifically, United States. So I did want to know a little bit about your background. One of the things I observed from my little bit of research that I could do was you're born in Guatemala, right?
Yes.
So what's that about?
If I can just go back to what you said,
Hundred
once
percent, please.
the war started, I started to get interested in podcast and starting to listen to Megan Kelly and
Mm,
all kind of Candace Owens, just to see what,
mm,
and even other people, just to see what they say in the United States, how it's talked about, in other countries, and Piers Morgan, and I never saw one mention of the division that there is among the Israeli people, because it seems like from
mm,
the outside, there's a agreement, or we're backing every step or decision that the Israeli government is
yeah,
doing, and it's just not so. Actually, the reality is that the people are very divided
mm,
in that regard. It's not like every move or decision represent the entire nation. Uh,
mm.
Far from that. Netanyahu is very, I don't know, just I'm not sure how to say it in English, controversial.
Controversial is the word,
Yes,
and I mean,
yes,
we're used to it, and I don't know, how many parallels I could make outside of, the way in which the media tends to demonize its least favorites and lie about the good qualities of their favorites, right? Like here we had Obama and they held him out to be like some black messiah, and then you have Trump, and he is demonized as the worst dictator, fascist, whatever, when in reality, Trump has done more, in 100 days of his second term than Obama did throughout the entire 8 years, as far as the progress of the country, as far as as far as putting the American people first, as far as doing things that are tangible as opposed to just talking like most politicians. So, when it comes to propaganda as well, is that's something I'm akin to. I'm used to traveling in Europe and hearing certain things said about Trump, and I'm like, that's not true.
yes,
I know that's not true. So that's always something I also wonder to say when it comes to a guy like Bibi. I'm sure there is, as you said, there are those who vilify him, and maybe for their good reason, but I could assume that there's also narratives because he is the leader of the Jews, and therefore he is automatic evil in the eyes of much of this westernized media. Well, not even
yes,
westernized, I guess you could say communized, right? Marxist sort of ideology. It's far from Western, actually hates Western civilization. But I could assume that there's that same sort of thing. And so to get into your comment about, the likes of the Candaces and, the Candace Qataris, as I like to call her, and some of these other individuals who I have my own opinions on, I believe, many of these people have equally become a part of that propaganda machine. Some just have genuine ideological differences that have turned into hatreds, right? Things of that nature. And so I don't think they care to get into the nuances or
yes,
even, who these people actually are and what they actually believe. They're more interested in the conspiracy theory or APAC or whatever else it may be.
yes,
So I wanted to get into and to tie this all together. So you were born in Guatemala, Guatemala,
yes,
Guatemala.
yes, I
So
was.
is it because did you have parents that were Israeli, or has your family lineage always been in Guatemala, and then you find yourself moving to Israel for some intended purpose? What was that about?
I was born there, but my
Mm-hmm.
biological mother couldn't raise me, so she gave me
Mm,
up for adoption. And
Mm.
then my Israeli parents arrived and adopted me at the age of 2 weeks. And I
Wow.
since then lived in Israel, and I'm not sure how to say it. When I was a baby, I was converted to Judaism.
At 2 weeks old.
Yes, it was actually a group
So,
of Israeli families that went over to Guatemala to adopt babies.
hmm. So that's, I mean, I had no idea that that was going to be the story, but that is deeply fascinating because, again, it tying back to this thing of the image that has been portrayed of the Jewish people or, Israel, etc. And here your story is that, you were taken in and cared for and raised by people who essentially had nothing to do with the culture that you were born into.
Yes, and I was very lucky
Mm,
to have my parents. They were very loving and nurturing parents.
mm. And so, you're also an artist by trade. Is that
Yes.
something that you always kind of had an inclination for? Is that something that, your family saw in you as a child and fostered it, or you rebelled and did it? What's that about?
Actually, my mother taught me how to um, draw with a pencil at the age, how to hold a pencil at the age of 1 year old, and since then I'm
Wow.
drawing. So I guess it was
You haven't let go
I
of that
don't.
pencil.
Yes, yes. I guess it was in me, but she very much nurtured that ability.
Mm, wow. And so you spend the rest of your adult life in Israel,
Yes.
or did you ever at some point venture off and go elsewhere?
No, Israel. Besides,
Mm,
a short trip, I always lived in Israel.
wow. Yeah, because when I first read the Guatemala, I'm thinking in my head it's like, oh, until you were 19, 20 years old, and then some experience led you to Israel, but you have literally spent the entirety of your life in
Yes,
Israel,
yes,
which I think gives even greater merit and context. Because there are many, by blood, I guess you could say, many individuals who are Jewish, but were not claiming their Judaism up until October 7th.
yes.
And there was almost go ahead.
I think that before that, I wasn't very close to the religion.
Mm,
There are some. Um, I don't know how to say it, but I think that after the war started and when I saw the Jew hatred, it's
mm-hmm,
I wanted to feel more connected to
mm,
Judaism, to the religion, to the Jewish people, because I
mm,
see them as as fighters in a way,
mm.
and I wanted to get close to that spirit of the Israeli Jewish, because I think it's fascinating the fact that Israel is such a tiny country and has succeeded to have very impressive achievement in 70
Yeah,
years, and the fact that the Jewish people were always um, not prosecuted. Help me with the word.
it is
Um,
persecuted. I mean, you could say
yes.
prosecuted. They would have tried to throw him in prison if they could, but it's, yeah, persecuted for sure.
And still managed to be here now.
Yeah.
So I see it as something that I want to get close to.
Yeah, and that's one thing that has always confused me is those who claim to be Christians having the Jew hate, as I call it, Jewish derangement syndrome, like they have the Trump derangement syndrome. Like
Yes,
how can you as a professed Christian whose entire faith is built on the foundation of a Jewish rabbi, because that's who Christ or Yeshua's disciples called him, the rabbi, that is inherently Jewish. The Last Supper was Passover. That
yes,
it's like the contradiction. So not just that, but then when you start looking into you know uh, levels of prophecy and you read into the legacy and the reflective future of Israel, it's all over the Old and New Testament. So for a professed Christian to not see these things, like I said it yesterday, I was being interviewed for actually a magazine out there in Israel, and the the owner, or I guess the lady who was interviewing me, I don't know if she would mind me saying her name or not, so I'll just not for this moment.
okay,
But I essentially got to a place where I said, look, the Iron Dome is something that's not said in word biblically, but it is something that is spoken of as far as, you will be attacked, like Israel will be attacked, and those missiles would not hit, or those attacks would not hit. These sorts of allusions, and some, I guess, even felt that they were maybe analogies. But now here we are seeing it in real life, where there is an Iron Dome and there are these attacks upon Israel that do not touch Israel,
yes,
and that you will not cease, that you will not perish, is something that is explicitly stated in there. And yet the past 70 years plus, there has been nothing but a campaign to eradicate Israel from its very inception, right? In a multitude of ways, whether it was prosecution or persecution, or somewhere in between. These things seem prophetic to me. Even just the
yes,
coming together, these peoples who are dispersed throughout the entire planet, and then they are brought back together on the very same land that they once came, the very same land, the same place whose capital is Jerusalem, the same capital that, Yeshua is to rule from. So, again, for those who profess to be Christians, it just utterly blows my mind to say, how are you not seeing this in front of you?
yes.
This
The
isn't
fact,
random that this,
yes,
please go ahead.
the fact that Israel is handling seven fronts, tiny little Israel, attacked from everywhere, and we have a very minimal manpower. We're not a big nation
Mm,
like the United States. So the fact that Israel is still standing and winning, or doing these crazy operations, in Iran, and it's impressive. It's impressive, and I do believe that there is something deeper. It's not.
yeah.
It's we're not going anywhere.
And
Even
and
though
that's the part that I, no, please continue.
I'm sorry, even though a lot of people would want us to disappear. That's one of the things that bother me the most in this war. The fact that
Yeah.
I want to say that it was such a um, polite war. If
Mm-hmm.
there is I'm in favor of how to say it, warn the Gazan people before bombing. I'm supportive of the way we conducted ourselves to try not to harm the civilians.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I didn't hear of any other country that held up to these standards ever. And we all know that if, God forbid, it was in the UK or the United States, the world would have your back to attack and to protect yourselves.
Yeah.
But here, even though you go with the protocol and you do what you have to do, and there's a legal advisement to the move that we do in Gaza, and we try to do it by the book, we'll say, nothing is good enough. There's
Nope.
always going to be criticism, and in a way, it's just led me to feel like, why won't you die like without fighting? Just
Mm,
why? That's the kind of feeling that you get from the world, like we're not allowed to do it. Why don't you like die in silence, or
yeah.
don't?
You got to kneel down. You got to bow down, and you got to take it.
Yes, yes,
You got to feed the people that are trying to kill you. You got to clothe them. You got to warn
yes,
them before you come for them. You you have to treat them as if they are something that nobody else recognized before this point in history,
yes. It's
a
impossible.
nation
Yes.
state.
And
So,
they don't understand that we are in an impossible situation with Hamas embedding themselves inside the civilians.
look, America blew up two Japanese cities, blew them up. And the history is, and I'm not saying that there would have been another way to end it. I wasn't there. I was not in charge of any of those, military operatives, etc. But they did nuke those innocent people along with, whatever military on the ground. And history tells it as America essentially won out that war. If it wasn't for America joining the Allied forces, we were the good guys. And I'm not one of these Tucker Carlson guys who then flips and says America's the bad guy and we no. I believe that Hitler was the bad guy or the worst of. It's not to say everybody else was innocent, but he was on a very clear mission. In the same way these jihadists are in a very clear mission. It's not a surprise. It's not some kind of hidden secret. They say it out loud on a daily basis. It's a proclamation. So here we have our own history. And then to look at that and say, well, Israel, you might want. No, America would have blown the entire strip in 2 days. I'm telling you that straight up.
Yes,
2 days. There wouldn't have been any questions. Everybody would have been on board. Lefties and the far right would have been all
yes,
together because their family members were affected in the
yes.
same way it was, September 11th.
That's what's so difficult to understand, that this is the treatment of the world towards Jewish people and Israeli people. Um, it's there's always, when people speak about October 7th, there's always the connection that yes, but like we
Mm.
um, brought it to ourselves because of what happened 75 years ago. It's always it's just a different treatment towards us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
But
not
that's
sure
why
why.
on my, I'm sorry.
No, no, continue.
Yeah, that's why again for me, going back to what many who profess to be Christian would say, well, in your scripture, it states that the world will turn its back on the Jewish people. It's prophecy. Again, from that perspective, if you truly believe that word, that's what it says. And so that's why, again, you spoke in the beginning about the spirit of the Jewish people and how, in spite of all of this, they continue to rise up. I mean, think about it. Half your population is wiped out in, the span of less than a decade.
Yes,
And here are the same people now on their own land that has become one of the most prosperous. It is literally a desert that has turned into an oasis. How else can you explain that while everybody else has remained desert dwellers?
Yes.
And those who have turned on them have been cursed, and those who have blessed them, including the United States, for, depending on the administrations. Right now is a very Israel friendly administration. It's it's something that I believe, and that's why I just believe I'm doing my part as you're doing yours and everybody else. But I believe that it is a battle that is already won. Because when you're on the side of the truth, you don't need to defend the truth. You need to tell the truth. You need to speak up for the truth. But as far as you don't have to make up extra stories, you don't have to wrestle. And that's why I believe they're on the losing side, because all they do is create more and more defenses for a lie. Like, just as simple as the starvation lie. They have to create imagery. They have to get this and this story. They have to get the little baby who supposedly has malnutrition but actually has a muscular disease. Like, there are all these sorts of strategies they have to come up with to uphold a lie, because the truth just speaks for itself to say, well, is this what's happening? No, it's not. As a matter of fact, they're being fed by their supposed enemy.
Yes.
That's a
But
reality.
it's interesting that you said that the war already won, because I'm very much concerned about what is happening in the world. You speak about it a lot on your videos about the extreme Islamic agenda of
Mm-hmm.
taking over the world. So I'm very concerned about the way that I feel like people, like Jew hatred, will result in their demise in a way. I'm hoping that I'm using the right word. It's like, in another way, I would say it like the true hatred is blinding them from who's the real threat, or what is actually going on here. So,
I I believe that's always been the purpose and intention of it at this very moment in time. It's the Trojan horse. It's look over here, and again, it's the ultimate gaslighting, which is these people doing what those people are actually doing. Like the Jewish people, Israel's been blamed and accused of doing every single thing that, you know, Islam has actually been doing. And I say Islam because it is an ideology, and those who fall under it and submit to it, they become these people. That's why I don't say it's the individual Muslims themselves. Sure, you have great people, but this ideology is all consuming. It's like, like the liberalism, just in a far more radical and devoted sense. So when I say the war is won, I really speak from a place of faith. And not everybody holds that same ground, but that's why I said I know we're doing our part. And the people I feel sorry for, to be honest with you, are the people who are standing on the wrong side of this thing. Those are the people I genuinely feel the worst for, because they're going to have their day in court, if we will say that. They're going to have to face their
yes,
own creator. That's my belief.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm also concerned about, the future, what will happen. You can already see that Europe is changing their landscape. And you know what will happen here in 20, 30 years, when the ratio of the population will change.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very concerning. And the fact that a part of the world is trying to, in a way, I will say it like prevent us from winning. It's almost like I feel that we're trying to fight with one hand tied behind our back, with all the criticism and all the standards that we need to do in the war, and so with all the difficulty that the world is placing over Israel, and making it harder for us to win. And by that, I also mean guarding the West, the
Mm-hmm.
Western culture, Europe and the United States, because Israel is the gateway. If if Israel loses, then everything changes, and people don't seem to understand that. So I am
Well,
concerned with the
I believe this because if you look back historically, there was a time when, if you were to look at the Turks, Ottoman, whatever it may be, there was a time when Islam was making its way throughout the world. And it took for, as controversial some may say, it took for the Crusades to stop it. It took for brave men who were willing to sacrifice, brave women who were willing to sacrifice. If you fast forward to the time of Churchill in World War II, when he was the only one who really saw the imminent threat that was out east, right? Out in Germany, Austria, Poland, etc. And he had to continue to fight and continue to tell the truth and continue to stand up for it in spite of being, the minority, in spite of being the small little voice. And so for me, and that's why I do what I do, because I understand that I have a job to do. If I know the truth, then my job is to tell the truth and to empower people with that unapologetically, no matter what, sort of psychological, mental, emotional, physical attacks may come my way. Again, I believe myself to be covered. Some may believe I'm naive, I'm foolish for what I do, but I will do it regardless. And so, you know, they speak of like the PR war and how Israel is losing PR. They're losing in the stories and the narrative war. And there's a truth to that, but also there was a time right before we call that day October 6th, when none of these lefties were raising a single one of these so called Palestinian flags. They all jump on a bandwagon because that was the loudest noise. And so, something I said when I was in an interview yesterday is there's been this timidity that hopefully has now been completely eradicated, which is you can't be shy about the truth now. It's like you said, people will come to you, well, the starvation, and no, there is no starvation. It's almost a fear of just saying things as they are and continuously doing so. And I've noticed that, and that, like in America, what allowed transgenderism and all this sort of stuff to take over and get our kids is because the ones who could speak were so afraid. And so the small minority had this massive voice and they continue to get their way. How is Islam making its way into the West? It's because people are afraid to be called racist. They're afraid to be called Islamophobes. Their white guilt consumes them. And so the fear that is the greatest fear, it begins with just telling the truth. Because with the truth, then comes the ideas that you build that foundation on. Western civilization is a series of ideas implemented, and these ideas work, right? Ideas of freedom and liberty, ideas of justice in the best way we can, capitalist societies of free trade between individuals freely. These things work. And when we cower down and when we're too afraid to hurt somebody's feelings or whatever it is, that's when we lose. So for me, it's, there's the war, the physical aspect of war. And if the West doesn't wake up to it now, as you say, as it's happening at the frontier that is Israel, which is the only Western existence you can really see in that region of the world. If they don't get it then it's going to be at their front doors. And now you're going to have to deal with it the same way your ancestors did. So
yes,
right now it's not war. Right now they're playing the little takia games and pretending to be your friends and your neighbors and whatever it is. But if they choose not to wake up at mass, if they choose to continue to appoint weak leader after weak leader, then unfortunately what happens, as Thomas Jefferson once said, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So if you fall asleep at the wheel, you're going to get exactly what's coming to you until you wake the hell up and do something about it.
yes, I agree with you. when I first saw your videos, I thought that you were very brave because
Thank you.
besides sharing the truth and understanding it, it also nowadays takes courage to say it because whomever is opposing to the Palestinian agenda is also being attacked with some sort of violence. If there's death threats or hatred, it's a lot to now. If someone speaks out, it's very unusual because they have to deal with a very strong backlash that some people will prefer not to, speak out to just avoid the backlash of
Yeah.
saying something of that movement is very violent. Uh, so I hope
But I
that
believe they use violence, but they use violence in the same way that, you spoke of how there's been something in the spirit of Israelis where it's you're going to try to bully us, you're going to try to attack us and do these things, but you're not going to stop us from living our lives, right?
yes,
And truth be told, again, whatever side people stand on the tactics of war, etc., is for the first time they've gotten the full wrath of just how hard a punch back from Israel can be. They say, "Oh, we're being attacked." No, you're just losing.
yes,
That's what's happening in reality. Like any other war, you're losing this war, and now you're playing the victim. Speaking of the quote unquote Gazans, quote unquote Palestinians. So
yes,
for me, it's the same thing when it comes to the game of words and semantics and politics, etc., is to say you just need a few brave men who don't care what the bully does. They're always going to show back up and they're going to hit back. You get hit, I mean, a literal bomb is detonated next to your home, but you're here right now speaking in public, like let alone how you're living your everyday life. That is a testament to the resilience. And so again, I am a wholehearted believer that that spirit right there can overcome. I mean, Belgium had fallen, France had fallen, this one had fallen, and England was outmatched. In that battle right there, to be the frontier of what was left of the West, truly, they were outmatched. And of course, you could say America came in and saved the day, etc. But there was a almost lone voice in the midst of all these other people who were either complacent, who were afraid, or maybe even on the other side. And that's the way that I view this is, even America's creation and inception. It was a few men. It wasn't all these, millions of people. No, there was no millions of people. It was a few, maybe even just a half dozen of these men who believed in this idea and they were willing to do anything for it. And so if we don't have that level of fortitude and bravery right now, then it's going to come. And sadly, it might come as a byproduct of another strong, willful force making its way in.
yes.
So I guess in conclusion, and I'm grateful that you were able to go, definitely a little more than past the time allotted. My question to you is, what is it that you would want or that you desire for your kids? I know that's a very personal sort of question, but
Well, I wish for peace. I do.
mm,
I don't. At this point, I'm not sure it's realistic, but I wish. Um, I'm 38. When I was a child, almost everyone that you will ask in my age group We grew up in Israel with the sentence that when you grow up, there will be no military. It's something very
Mm,
Israeli that parents told their children, and wanting and believing in peace. So I do wish for peace. Um, actually, I wish that the the Gaza people will try to live to accept the existence of Israel and the
mm,
Jewish people here, and will try to live alongside us. And I think that if they will prosper, then then that will change the situation. So I wish for peace. I wish
mm.
there will be no more wars, but I'm doubtful. But you can still be hopeful.
Yeah. And so I
Thank
wish you peace, and I wish your family and all your loved ones peace. If it can't be
thank
the
you.
entirety of the region, then at the very least within your own lives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I
Absolutely.
also wanted to add that I wish for the world situation will change with the Jew hatred. That is very painful understanding to see how all the way that the hatred manifests and threatening us as Jewish people. That now we have come back to days that we need to hide our religion. Um, so, if you ask me that question, I wish for that situation to change and for people to accept us and don't believe all the lies and stereotypes and what people say about Jewish people. I wish my son, will not experience that.
Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Now, if you'd like to stay around, make sure to click that little subscribe button down there, or you can show some love by going to the description below and clicking on the button titled Buy Me a Coffee. Leave a little something there, or click on the Cash App. Leave a little something here. Till the next time, peace. I've been up for hours, I've been up for days, yeah. Staring at the ceiling, I've been counting strays, yeah. I've been in my feelings, I've been out of mind. I've been getting visions of the other kind. Yeah, I've been up for weeks. I'm in the count of blessings over count of sheep. I can never be the type to limit when it comes to me. I used to be the pleaser for the people I ain't even need.